The world held its breath. Silence fell not from peace, but from uncertainty. A sudden announcement, a ceasefire. After weeks of escalating violence, fiery speeches, and devastating missile exchanges, leaders from both sides stood in front of cameras and declared the fighting was over. But behind closed doors, the war never really stopped. It simply changed shape. People danced in the streets, kissed their children with hope in their eyes, and clutched radios with trembling hands, praying this time it was real. But others watched cautiously, eyes narrowed, voices low, murmuring what many were afraid to say aloud. Was this ceasefire genuine, or just another move on the political chessboard? The ceasefire was signed in the dead of night, after relentless international pressure and growing fear of a wider regional war. Western diplomats celebrated, their faces stretched into smiles, while regional powers exchanged cold handshakes under the surface. The announcement came with a promise of restraint, reconstruction, and respect. But who really benefits from this pause in violence? Iran, bloodied yet defiant, framed the ceasefire as a victory. It claimed it had defended its dignity, that it had shown the world its strength. Yet within Tehran's halls of power, security chiefs met in secrecy, eyes scanning maps, lists of assets, coded updates from allies not bound by signatures. The war, they whispered, was far from over. It had only entered a new phase. Israel, wounded but resolute, agreed to the ceasefire amid rising public pressure and exhausted defense lines. The costs of continued war were growing. International condemnation loomed. But was it surrender or strategy? Behind every political press conference lay a military calculation. Every word about peace was weighed against intelligence reports, satellite feeds, and hidden deals with foreign powers. America watched closely, involved in every thread. Publicly, it welcomed the ceasefire, calling it a necessary step towards stability. Privately, its intelligence agencies monitored border movements, intercepted encrypted chatter, and tracked weapons shipments rerouted in the quiet of this so-called peace. Washington knew better than most that truces in this region are often temporary illusions, tactics, not treaties. And while leaders celebrated, the streets told a different story. In Gaza, silence replaced the roar of drones, but hunger and grief remained. Families buried their dead with no promise it wouldn't happen again. Children asked if school would open tomorrow, or if the bombs would return. In Tel Aviv, parents hesitated at playground gates, not sure whether to breathe freely or stay ready to run. Every ceasefire carries hope. But hope alone doesn't erase mistrust. It doesn't reverse decades of bloodshed or dissolve the ambitions of those who thrive in chaos. Why now? That's the question echoing from newsrooms to living rooms across the world. What changed? Some analysts say the timing is everything. Iran's economy is suffocating. Sanctions have driven it into internal crisis. Prolonged war threatened to break the fragile domestic balance. A ceasefire was not a choice, it was survival. But survival isn't surrender, it's a reset, a chance to regroup, reload, and prepare. Others argue Israel needed this pause too. The cost of continued conflict was bleeding its international reputation. The images of destroyed homes and civilian casualties ignited global protest. Allies like the US and European powers were beginning to grow restless. Tel Aviv's leaders knew that even military strength has political limits. So, both sides stepped back, not out of trust, but out of necessity. And that raises the chilling question. Is this peace, or simply a pause between wars? Intelligence sources in Europe have confirmed unusual diplomatic activity. Quiet meetings in neutral capitals. Shadowy envoys from Gulf states exchanging sealed envelopes. Military advisors from Russia and China quietly signalling interest in post-ceasefire dynamics. The conflict might have paused, but the global game around it is accelerating. Meanwhile, inside Iran, a silent purge has begun. Critics of the government's strategy are disappearing. Reformist voices vanish from social media. Nationalist rhetoric floods state broadcasts. A new doctrine is being shaped, one not of retreat, but of reinvention. Israel, on the other hand, is reinforcing its defences, not dismantling them. Satellite imagery reveals expanded Iron Dome positions, new surveillance systems, and secretive meetings with allies in the Mediterranean. Diplomats talk peace. Generals plan for the next strike. In Washington, a classified report circulates among the top echelons of power. Its headline is chilling: Ceasefire Unstable Prepare Contingency. It outlines 3 scenarios: diplomatic breakdown, proxy ignition, or direct confrontation. None of them include long-term peace. And the proxies. What about Hezbollah, Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq? None of them signed this ceasefire. Their loyalty isn't to declarations but to causes. Already, whispers suggest they're regrouping, rearming, awaiting orders. The battlefield has shifted from open skies to silent streets, from airstrikes to cyber attacks, from rockets to ideology. So who wins from this ceasefire? The people or the players? In a public square, it feels like a win. No more sirens, no more funerals. Aid trucks roll into devastated neighborhoods. Water and food reach displaced families. Children sleep in their beds. But underneath that fragile peace, the political machinery is still grinding forward, because real peace is not just silence, it's trust, it's disarmament, it's accountability, none of which are fully present here. Yeah. Not yet. And so the world watches, carefully, cautiously, waiting to see whether this ceasefire becomes history's turning point, or just another chapter in a never-ending war masked by carefully chosen words. In the days following the ceasefire announcement, a wave of international applause echoed from Berlin to Beijing. Politicians praised the immaturity of both Iran and Israel, while humanitarian organizations scrambled to make use of the brief calm to deliver desperately needed aid. But behind every official statement was a lingering sense of unease. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the question hung heavily in the air. How long would this peace last? Diplomatic missions intensified. European envoys, under pressure from their citizens, initiated back-channel communications. Countries like Qatar, Oman, and Turkey, long experienced in walking the tightrope between warring factions, emerged as mediators. But even they, while smiling in front of cameras, expressed doubt in private. A seasoned Turkish diplomat was quoted saying, "This isn't peace, it's a strategic timeout." The intelligence agencies knew better. The lull in violence allowed for one crucial development: recalibration. Iran began redeploying assets under the radar. Arms shipments from allies were subtly redirected. Engineering teams worked overnight to restore damaged radar facilities. Meanwhile, Israeli drones never stopped flying. They just flew higher, quieter, tracking everything, capturing movement, monitoring breath. The war had merely changed uniforms. Instead of soldiers, it was diplomats. Instead of bombs, it was leverage. Every move was a message, every silence a signal. In Tehran's parliament, hardliners seized the opportunity to declare ideological victory. They told the people, "We stood our ground. We made the world listen." But in private, they debated how to manage an exhausted population, dwindling resources, and growing dissent. The ceasefire bought them time, not peace. On Israel's political stage, tensions soared. The Prime Minister faced criticism from both sides. Hawks accused him of surrendering under pressure. Moderates claimed the ceasefire was a necessary compromise. Defense officials remained tight-lipped, but leaked audio revealed war rooms still active, military scenarios still being gamed out. Meanwhile, in southern Lebanon, something troubling occurred. A convoy carrying unknown cargo moved under heavy guard toward the Bekaa Valley. Satellite footage picked up the movement, and within hours, Israeli intelligence flagged it as a high priority. The ceasefire hadn't stopped Hezbollah. It had merely reoriented their strategy. Missiles no longer had to be fired to make a statement. The threat of them, properly placed, was enough to influence negotiations. Back in Iraq and Syria, militias connected to Tehran subtly resumed training exercises, not overtly aggressive, but symbolic. A reminder, the resistance axis had not been dismantled. It was simply waiting. The shadow war was alive and well. Cyber units, too, remained fully operational. In one night alone, Israeli cyber defense systems logged over 2,300 intrusion attempts, originating from networks in Iran, Iraq, and even Yemen. These weren't amateur hackers. These were coordinated, state-backed operations probing for weaknesses in water systems, financial databases, and defense architecture. Silent warfare in the age of so-called peace. Inside the White House Situation Room, President Biden's team received a new threat assessment. The report concluded that the ceasefire was a tenuous, a conditional, and a subject to rapid collapse if provoked. The National Security Council warned that US interests in the region could be jeopardized if another conflict flared up unexpectedly. Emergency plans were drawn. Troop repositioning began in secret. The peace had not brought rest. It had brought redirection. In the media, the narrative began to shift. At first, the headlines were celebratory. A truce triumphs, a peace at last, hope restored, but within days, inconsistencies began to emerge. Reporters on the ground noted the lack of international monitors. No neutral eyes were present to verify either side's claims. No official demilitarized zones were set up. No shared rebuilding commissions were formed. It was a ceasefire built on nothing but words. And words, history had shown, can be dangerously fragile. Then came the breach. In the early morning hours of the seventh day, a single rocket was fired from Gaza. It didn't reach far. It was intercepted by the Iron Dome. No casualties, no damage. But the message was unmistakable. Someone wasn't playing by the rules. The group claiming responsibility was obscure, previously unknown. But Israeli officials believed it to be a front, a disposable name used by larger, more sophisticated factions. Israel responded not with missiles but with silence, a strategic silence. Tehran's response was also muted, dismissing the rocket as an undisciplined act by non-state actors. But Israeli surveillance showed increased radio traffic in southern Lebanon and mobilization patterns near Golan. This wasn't over, it was boiling again, quietly, and in the streets of Tehran and Tel Aviv. People felt it, not with their eyes but in their bones. A mother in Ashkelon refused to send her children back to school. A shopkeeper in Shiraz stockpiled canned food. They had seen this story before. A ceasefire without teeth is a storm that pretends to be a breeze. In Riyadh, Cairo, and Amman, leaders convened emergency security meetings. While they officially supported the truce, they also feared its failure. The collapse of the ceasefire could drag them back into the chaos. So they began hedging bets. Some increased security on their borders. Others quietly reopened lines of communication with the West, even with Israel, just in case alliances had to shift quickly. The ceasefire, it seemed, was not a destination but a stage, a performance for the world to believe things had calmed, while behind the curtain, the actors changed clothes and rehearsed for Act Two. In the background, civilian voices tried to rise. Mothers, teachers, students, business owners, survivors, they begged for the ceasefire to hold. Not because they believed the politicians, but because they were exhausted, because they had nothing left to lose. But as history has shown, the hopes of ordinary people often become the collateral of geopolitical ambition. The truth was emerging. This ceasefire might have saved lives in the short term, but without trust, transparency, and real accountability, it was little more than a break between explosions. And this break was ending. The world may call it a ceasefire, but in the hearts of those who have lived through the flames, it is something else entirely, a breath held, a wound unhealed, a silence waiting to be broken. And until truth replaces tactics, until justice is louder than strategy, the question will echo through every border, every city, and every soul. Was this ever peace, or just the calm before the next storm?